faithfully conveying value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally Book Talk. Today, we're interpreting a book called The New Orange Seller's Words by renowned economist Steven Cheung. He served as an economics professor at the University of Washington and later as tenured professor and head of economics and finance at the University of Hong Kong. Cheung studied under Armin Alchian, founder of modern property rights economics. His colleagues and close friends, Coase, North, Friedman, and Stigler, were pivotal figures in Western economics, several being Nobel laureates. Cheung made significant contributions to institutional economics.
Starting with his doctoral thesis on sharecropping theory, he focused on contractual arrangements in economic activities, later developing contract economics, based on Ronald Coase's work on firm nature.
In 1991, he was invited to speak at the Nobel Economics Prize ceremony. Typically, only Nobel laureates receive this honor, underscoring Cheung's academic standing, yet he remains highly controversial. Cheung disregards mainstream economic conventions. He scoffs at modern economics' over-reliance on mathematical analysis. He often teases his Nobel-winning friends, saying they use equations because their prose is too poor, whereas his own mind flashes with creative insights needing no mathematical packaging. And one time, Cheung once proudly defined he was UCLA's last economics PhD graduate who never took calculus. Yet this mainstream defiance repeatedly cost him the Nobel Prize. Of course, Cheung's influence extends beyond academia. He's a public intellectual star. To the public, he's a mischievous old sage who loves provocative statements. He tells them, minimum wage hurts the poor, and anti-counterfeiting efforts are unnecessary. These claims defy common wisdom, yet facts often prove Cheung right. His sharp wit and uncannily accurate predictions won him fans beyond academia. Today's book was originally titled The Chrysanthemum Seller's Words, a collection of Cheung's 33 newspaper essays. Steven Cheung excels at starting from small, everyday events and using simple, straightforward language to derive profound economic principles from basic facts. This book perfectly embodies his style. Later, the book was expanded to 74 articles, adding analyses on a range of economic issues involving various policies and institutions, and was renamed The New Orange Seller's Words. Right. So today we're interpreting this expanded edition. I'll interpret 3 stories from the book to see how Steven Cheung derived his most influential economic ideas. The first is the story of selling orange trees. The second is about farming oysters. The third is the story of boat trackers.
Finally, we'll interpret an economic issue Cheung has focused on recently: the relationship between wage and welfare systems and industrial competitiveness.
Let's start with Steven Cheung's story of selling orange trees. The original title of this book, The Chrysanthemum Seller's Words, parodies the famous essay, The Orange Seller's Words, by Ming Dynasty politician Liu Bowen. Liu's story is a fable, but Cheung's chrysanthemum selling is a real event. As a renowned economist and tenured professor at the University of Hong Kong, Steven Cheung took a group of students to sell orange trees on the streets of Hong Kong on Chinese New Year's Eve to uncover the true causes of price fluctuations. In Cantonese, the word for orange sounds the same as auspiciousness in the phrase great luck and prosperity. To seek auspicious blessings during Chinese New Year, every Hong Kong household displays several small orange trees that are ornamental, not edible. And, Hong Kongers call them neonju, and there's a designated spot on the streets where vendors sell these orange trees. Cheung observed price fluctuation phenomena in this neonju market that completely contradicted traditional economics. In Cheung's neonju selling process, he initially priced each pot at $80, but would sell if bargained down to $60. At 11 p.m., it started raining, and prices dropped immediately. Half an hour later, the rain stopped and prices rose. After midnight, prices were reduced to $70. From midnight to 1 a.m., customers were the most numerous, because they thought they could get bargains after midnight, making the bargaining process longer. After 1 a.m., price reductions increased, and eventually each pot was priced at just $30, with some selling for $20. Theoretically, in Hong Kong's highly developed market economy, there's no supply shortage for neon Jew, and demand is stable. Every household always buys a few pots for the new year.
According to classical economic theory, supply and demand determine prices. So, me and you, price fluctuations shouldn't be large. But the reality was different.
The same pot of New Year oranges embodies the same human labor and transportation costs, yet its price fluctuates threefold within just a few hours. Why? Steven Cheung's answer is that information asymmetry is the key factor in price fluctuations.
Cheung analyzed that, in the New Year orange market, sellers know both the wholesale price per pot and the transaction price of the one just sold, while buyers are completely in the dark, unaware of the base price or actual market transaction prices.
For this small item, under 100 Hong Kong dollars, buyers aren't willing to spend time and effort inquiring around, so sellers exploit the information gap to profit from price differences. And traditional economics has always focused on production costs and supply-demand relationships, paying little attention to information asymmetry between buyers and sellers or transaction costs in real markets. Such issues have long failed to explain why sharp price fluctuations occur in real markets, but Cheung, starting from market transaction details, enriched the principles of price mechanism formation. And building on this, Cheung developed many new branches of institutional economics, making economic theories, explanations of real-life economics, increasingly practical. The story of selling orange trees on New Year's Eve vividly reflects Steven Cheung's pragmatic academic attitude of learning from and applying to the market. Using this method, he discovered profound principles in the minutiae of the real world, correcting many erroneous explanations by traditional economics. Next, we'll discuss another important idea of his through the story of oyster farming. During his time at the University of Washington in Seattle, Steven Cheung farmed oysters on the beach of his private residence. Washington State has high latitude and a cold climate. Oysters grow slowly there, so in terms of natural conditions, it's definitely not an ideal place for oyster farming. However, state law stipulates that beaches, as appurtenances to private residences, are privately owned and outsiders cannot freely harvest oysters on private beaches. This strict institutional setup made Washington State, despite poor natural conditions, the most famous oyster-producing region in the U.S. Because oysters from private beaches are legally protected, and owners are willing to work hard to maintain their private property. They don't take the oysters home to squeeze lemon juice on them and enjoy them slowly by the fireplace. Instead, they brave the cold wind to open and eat them on the beach, solely to leave the oyster juices in place to nourish the next batch. The owners carefully place the opened oyster shells back on the beach to facilitate new oysters attaching. They also patrol the beach daily, fishing out starfish, the natural predators of oysters, and drying them ashore. In short, the owners spare no effort to maintain the oyster farm's productivity. With institutional protection, oyster farming has become a major tradition in Washington State. When signing contracts for beachfront properties, buyers explicitly agree on oyster farm rights, clarifying ownership and profit sharing, turning beach privatization laws into big business. On public beaches where anyone can harvest oysters, no one would maintain them or develop institutional contracts. And here is a setup for providing. Steven Cheung used this story to prove that clear property rights matter more than natural resources. If people can't legally enjoy their labor's fruits, why work hard for others' benefit? Only where property rights are clear can commodity production and prosperity exist. Starting from oyster beach property arrangements, Steven Cheung extended property rights theory to various fields. He found almost nothing is truly ownerless. Bees pollinating orchards or wild fish all have ownership contracts. Since ancient times, disputes over claiming ownerless things have been endless. For example, in the U.S., salmon return from the ocean to West Coast river estuaries. Agricultural strategy incubating salmon eggs at estuaries and releasing them, exploiting salmon's instinct to return and spawn. They set nets at estuaries, treating the Pacific as a fish farm, though the vast ocean belongs to no one. This ocean as pond approach seemed harmless. But farm salmon flooded the market, crashing prices and harming deep-sea fishermen's livelihoods.
Fishermen rallied under ecological pretense, demanding West Coast states ban estuary salmon farming. Steven Cheung from
This incident drew two conclusions. First, property rights are ubiquitous, even for seemingly ownerless things like ocean fish. As long as it can be captured and sold in markets as a commodity, disputes over interests inevitably arise. Whether through friendly negotiations and contracts or lawsuits when negotiations fail, people devise various methods to secure more benefits from these ownerless resources. The second conclusion is that well-defined property rights boost production. Simply clarifying property rights at river estuaries incentivizes owners to invest in salmon hatcheries. Human fishery production not only avoids depleting marine resources, but also yields higher output than natural fishing. Thus, Steven Cheung concluded that clear property rights are prerequisites for economic prosperity. Next, we'll explore the third story, the boat tracker's tale, and extend our discussion from it. Steven Cheung examines the nature of firms. As a youth fleeing Japanese invaders, Steven Cheung escaped with his mother along Guangxi's Wuchang River. Without diesel engines and during windless periods, boats relied entirely on trackers pulling them. Cheung noticed a supervisor at the bow who'd fiercely whip any slacking tracker with a long whip. His mother told young Cheung, "I heard ashore that the trackers pulled money to hire this supervisor themselves." Isn't that bizarre? It truly is. Why would trackers pay someone to whip and enslave them? Was there no other way to ensure labor? This puzzle stayed with young Cheung. Later at UCLA, he read economist Ronald Coe's paper, The Nature of the Firm. In this work, Coe is addressed why people form firms. Why do bosses and employees exist? Adam Smith offered a classic explanation in The Wealth of Nations, using a pin factory as an example. In the pin factory, some workers draw wire, others specialize in sharpening pins, others in piercing holes, each refining their specific task through repetition. Over time, this specialization, combined with improved equipment, multiplied output hundreds-fold over independent artisans, slashed costs, dominated markets, and forced solo pin makers into other trades.
But Adam Smith's explanation has a flaw. It describes the outcome of firms, not the cause, failing to explain who initially gathered workers to start factories.
It also can't explain why some invest in equipment to hire others, while some prefer being hired and others choose to work solo. Coe offered a new explanation in The Nature of the Firm. He argued that self-employed individuals appear independent but face daily market risks, spending energy gathering market information, pricing products, and bearing transaction costs. Employees avoid these by accepting lower pay and obeying bosses. Workers join firms to transfer risks to managers, reducing transaction costs. In 1991, Coe won the Nobel Prize for introducing transaction costs to explain firms. He's recognized as the founder of new institutional economics. Coe's theory partially resolved Cheung's confusion. Trackers focused on pulling couldn't monitor peers' effort, requiring a whip-wielding supervisor.
Coe explained role differences through risk preference. Risk takers become bosses, risk-averse become employees.
Cheung found this unconvincing. Tracker versus supervisor roles weren't about risk tolerance. He deepened the discussion with another example. Post-War II Hong Kong's economic takeoff began with primitive outsourcing, initially without factories. Cottage industries prevailed. Poor residents took orders from agents, stringing colored beads onto nylon threads for Western accessories. Western firms disdained this labor-intensive work. Bead stringers dealt with multiple subcontractors. Agents were several steps removed from original Western buyers. They ran between buildings all day, delivering, collecting, and inspecting goods. Judging by their clothing, Steven Cheung estimated these agents barely scraped by on commissions. Witnessing this sparked several insights for Cheung. First, no impassable gap existed between bead stringers and market agents. Roles were interchangeable. Second, agents paid piece rates for finished bead chains, essentially purchasing labor. Traditional economics separates commodity and factor markets, but here agents bought both labor time and products, showing these markets are fundamentally one. Based on this analysis, Cheung challenged Coase in his 1983 paper, The Contractual Nature of the Firm. Cheung argued Coase was wrong. Firms don't replace markets to lower transaction costs. Workers simply substitute employment contracts for commercial contracts. Giving free contracting, people choose entrepreneurship or employment based on expected returns. Thus, the entrepreneur-employee distinction isn't fundamental. In piece rate systems, labor contracts and product contracts are identical. Supervisors and workers coexist only because some tasks can't be piece rated, requiring time-based wages and oversight.
Hence, trackers hiring whippers. It ensured efficiency where measurement was difficult.
Cheung concluded, true transaction cost reduction comes not from firms but from freely negotiated labor contracts. And firms' essence is connecting resources, land, labor, capital, through product, employment, and property contracts. For workers, freely choosing highest-paying jobs optimizes talent use, incentivizes self-investment, and achieves ideal knowledge-labor matching. Overall, the guaranteed freedom for market entities to contract, enabling free trade of labor, land, and property rights, is foundational to modern economic prosperity. And that concludes the third story, where Steven Cheung explained firms' nature through contracts. Next, we address a key issue in this book, the relationship between compensation systems and industrial competitiveness. Steven Cheung opposes all interference in free labor contracting, even under the guise of protecting the weak or enhancing public welfare.
He argues generous labor welfare distorts price mechanisms and cripples an economy's competitiveness.
Cheung observed vast differences in compensation systems across U.S. industries. The U.S. IT industry is relatively new, with young programmers and underdeveloped unions. Its labor market features pure competition, rampant talent poaching and job hopping among top technicians. In T, workers focus solely on tangible rewards. Salaries, bonuses, stock options. At Microsoft's campus-style HQ with dining, gyms, bars, offices stay lit all night. Programmers work 100-plus hour weeks, 996 schedule. Though grueling, many become multimillionaires within a decade, retiring early to travel. Meanwhile, U.S. IT firms dominate globally through relentless innovation. The U.S. auto industry tells a different story. With century-old unions wielding power, automakers can't set compensation based on business needs, constantly conceding higher wages, paid vacations, shorter weeks, and massive severance packages. Cheung argues U.S. automakers sustain this workforce by living off past glories. Under union pressure, management redistributes excess profits, earned through brands, R&D, and patents, to assembly line workers. In high-benefit, low-competition environments, with extreme job stability, assembly line workers grow accustomed to low-intensity, low-pressure work. Meanwhile, executives and R&D staff, who should receive extra incentives, either leave for other industries or lose motivation due to lack of bonuses. Management also lacks funds for new vehicle R&D and tech upgrades, causing entire industries to lag behind global competitors. When cyclical economic crises hit, giants like GM, Ford, and Chrysler are often first to near collapse, requiring costly government bailouts. The relationship between welfare systems and competitiveness across U.S. industries proves excessive welfare policies harm competitiveness and ultimately fail workers. Western nations struggle to revive declining manufacturing because they can't break free from welfare dependency.
Unions are powerful pressure groups, organizing strikes and protests, becoming key voting blocs during elections. Politicians not only avoid confronting them, but keep escalating concessions. It is
Theft for protectionism, tax breaks, and transfer payments, they reinforce this welfare dependency.
From free contracting perspective, Steven Cheung explains how minimum wage, restricted hours, and firing bans distorts labor markets.
Why do they harm competitiveness? He believes even brilliant politicians and economists can't calculate a proper minimum wage. Industrial minimum wages are determined by agricultural sector incomes. Wage growth is an organic process beyond human control. Minimum wages emerge naturally when urban-rural income equilibrium halts agricultural to industrial labor migration. Before this, with surplus rural labor, businesses easily hire at low wages. Government-imposed minimum wages backfire. Businesses automate, cut jobs, or close, ultimately hurting workers. The only outcomes: reduced business investment, halted labor migration, real unemployment, proving welfare policies' destructive side effects. Steven Cheung reminds the government to be patient and wait for the equilibrium point to arrive, not to intervene prematurely. Labor and capital autonomously sign labor contracts. With this, the entire book's content is concluded. Finally, let's briefly review the content of this book. At first glance, this collection seems casual and free-flowing, but it actually has strong internal logic. It essentially encompasses Steven Cheung's main academic thoughts. Steven Cheung is one of the main pioneers of contemporary, new institutional economics. His research perspective shifted from traditional economics' focus on production and supply-demand relationships to transaction aspects, developing key concepts and theories like information asymmetry, transaction costs, and property rights contracts. From the story of selling orange trees, we learned the important role of factors like information asymmetry and transaction costs in price mechanism formation. In the story of farming oysters, we saw how property rights arrangements can greatly guide human behavior. In the story of the boat trackers, we saw Steven Cheung explain the nature of firms from a contractual perspective. Finally, through analyzing the relationship between welfare systems and industrial competitiveness, we understood Steven Cheung's viewpoint. Only by ensuring that labor and capital freely and voluntarily enter into contracts can we effectively allocate social resources and lead society to lasting prosperity and wealth. If you want to learn more about Steven Cheung's ideas and new institutional economics, you can further read his works like Economic Explanation and the Economic System of China. The New Orange Seller's Words. We've interpreted this book for you up to here. Listening notes are below the audio. We'll see you tomorrow.